You're walking on thin ice, Emma. If Liam ever finds out what's really happening, everything you built could come crashing down, Patricia warned, her voice edged with concern as she leaned forward, her face filled with worry. The kitchen was enveloped in an oppressive silence, broken only by the steady ticking of the clock, though the tension between them was unmistakable. Emma, casually leaning against the counter with a glass of wine in hand, seemed utterly indifferent to Patricia's concerns. "Patricia, you need to relax," Emma replied nonchalantly, brushing off her friend's warning. "Liam is too wrapped up in his work to notice anything. We barely even speak these days." She took another sip of her wine, her expression a mix of confidence and detachment. Patricia nervously ran her finger around the rim of her coffee mug, her eyes fixed on Emma. Did Emma truly understand the gravity of her situation, or was she simply blinded by the excitement of her affair? "I don't know, Emma. You think you've got it all under control, but secrets like this have a way of unraveling. And Liam, he's patient, but even he has limits." Emma rolled her eyes, her voice cold and detached. "You're overthinking it. I've got it handled, trust me." A smug smile crossed her face, as though she relished the thrill of living a double life. "Besides," Emma added, her tone softening as she spoke of her lover, "Daniel is worth it. He's nothing like Liam, he's exciting." Patricia shook her head, her gaze shifting to the dim light filtering through the kitchen window. Over the years she had watched Emma's marriage slowly fall apart. Liam wasn't a bad husband, he was reliable, stable, always present. But it was these very qualities that Emma had grown to despise. The spark in their relationship had long since faded, leaving her searching for something more. "I get it, Emma. I really do," Patricia said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Liam doesn't give you what you need anymore, but this is risky. You're playing with fire." Emma let out a quiet laugh. "Risky," she shrugged. "Liam won't do anything. He's too calm. If he finds out, maybe it'll finally push him to leave. Honestly, I wouldn't mind being free of this marriage." Patricia's eyes widened in disbelief. "Do you even realize what you're saying?" she asked, stunned. "You're talking about ending your marriage, your entire life, as if it doesn't matter." Emma shrugged again, even more dismissively. "Maybe it doesn't. I'm tired, Patricia. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine. Being with Daniel is the first time in years I've felt alive." Patricia leaned in, her concern deepening. "And what about Daniel? Do you really think this will last? What happens when the excitement fades, just like it did with Liam?" Emma paused, swirling the wine in her glass before answering quietly, "I don't know. I'll deal with that when it happens." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fears. Patricia could see Emma slipping further away, consumed by impulsive decisions and reckless desires. The looming disaster weighed heavily on her. "Emma," Patricia said softly, her voice calm but filled with worry, "just promise me you'll be careful. Liam may seem composed, but everyone has a breaking point. Push too far, and you don't know how he'll react." Emma chuckled, though this time there was a slight tension in her laugh. "I'm not scared of Liam. He won't do anything drastic. Sure, he'll be upset if he finds out, but it'll blow over. Liam's not the kind to lose control." But as Patricia looked at Emma, she couldn't shake the feeling that her friend was dangerously underestimating how fragile the situation had become. It seemed as if Emma was blind to the storm gathering around her, and Patricia feared that when it finally struck, the fallout would be far worse than Emma could imagine. Patricia stood, placing her cup gently on the table with a soft clink. "I just hope you're making the right choice," she said, reaching for her jacket draped over the back of a chair. "You need to understand the risk situations like this rarely end without consequences." Emma, following Patricia to the door, nodded confidently. "I've thought it all through. I'm ready for whatever comes next," she said, her voice full of self-assurance. As Patricia stepped out into the cool evening air, she hesitated for a moment, turning back with a worried expression. "If you're not careful, everything could fall apart," she warned. Emma's confident smile remained unchanged. "I've got it under control, Patricia. Trust me." Watching Patricia walk down the street and disappear around the corner, Emma returned to the kitchen, feeling the warmth of the wine spread through her. She set her half-empty glass on the counter and picked up her phone. A few taps brought her to Daniel's contact, and her heart quickened at the sight of his familiar profile picture. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen as she typed a message, excitement bubbling inside her. thinking about you. Can't wait for tomorrow." Almost immediately the typing bubble appeared, and his response came quickly. "Miss you. Tomorrow can't come soon enough." "Same time? Same place?" she asked, a smile creeping across her face. "Of course," he replied. The thrill of their secret meetings filled Emma with adrenaline, a rush she hadn't felt in years. But as she leaned against the counter, her smile faltered briefly. Patricia's warning echoed in her mind. What if Liam finds out? Emma had been so careful there were no obvious clues, but she knew Liam wasn't easy to deceive. If he ever suspected something, he wouldn't rest until he uncovered the truth. Emma shook off the creeping unease, determined not to let it spoil the thrill of the moment. As long as she played her part perfectly, she could keep her two worlds from colliding. She poured herself another glass of wine and moved into the living room, sinking into the comforting softness of the couch. The house was unusually quiet, with Liam still tied up in another endless business meeting. She wondered if he had noticed the growing distance between them, or if perhaps he too felt a strange sense of relief in their separation. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Daniel. "I was thinking, what if we went away together for the weekend? Leave everything behind for a few days." Emma's heart quickened at the idea. A weekend away would be harder to hide, much more difficult to explain, but the temptation to escape her crumbling marriage with Daniel was too strong. She hesitated, fingers poised above her phone, but before she could reply, the hum of the garage door interrupted her thoughts. Liam was home. Quickly turning her phone face down on the table, she grabbed the TV remote. By the time he entered the room, she was casually flipping through channels, her smile practiced but convincing. "You're home early," she said, keeping her tone light. "Yeah, the meeting ended sooner than I expected," Liam replied, barely glancing at her as he headed into the kitchen. His tone was neutral, but something in his demeanor felt off, something that sent a ripple of discomfort through her. As she listened to him moving around in the kitchen, Emma's mind raced. Does he know? Did I slip up? Meanwhile, Liam sat alone in his office, the soft glow of his laptop the only light in the room. It was well past midnight, but sleep was the last thing on his mind. His eyes, red and tired from staring at the screen, were fixed on Emma's recent bank transactions. Suspicion gnawed at him, thoughts spiraling in his head. Restaurant charges, hotel bills, none of them from places he'd ever been to on the nights Emma claimed to be out with friends. Each new piece of evidence confirmed what he had been trying so hard to deny. His hand hovered over the mouse, fingers trembling slightly as he opened her messages. He had managed to access her accounts without her knowing. Pausing to take a deep breath, he knew that once he clicked, there would be no turning back. The messages appeared, long conversations hidden under the contact name Linda Michael, a seemingly innocent alias. But Liam knew better. There was no Linda, and these messages were far from innocent. He clicked on one thread. "Can't wait to see you tonight." Same place. The reply was almost immediate. "Already missing you." Of course, Liam's jaw clenched, a cold weight of dread settling in his chest. His fists tightened as he whispered the name under his breath. Daniel. The name stung like venom. He had seen it before, hinted at in fragments of deleted messages. He had pieced together who Daniel was: younger, confident, smooth-talking, working at the nearby real estate office. The same Daniel who had been spending nights with Liam's wife while he worked late hours. Liam leaned back in his chair, staring blankly at the screen. The storm of betrayal that had been brewing in his mind now raged with full force. He had known for some time that their marriage had problems, that much had been obvious. But this was a betrayal on a level he hadn't imagined. For months he had questioned where things had gone wrong. Was it his long hours at work? Had he truly neglected her needs? He knew he hadn't been the most attentive husband lately, but Emma's deceit felt like a knife to his heart, a wound far deeper than any marriage troubles they could have worked through. Looking back, the signs had always been there: her sudden obsession with late-night outings, her frequent weekend trips with friends, the growing emotional distance between them. That distance, once a manageable rift, had become an insurmountable divide. He remembered asking her gently one night if everything was okay. She had laughed it off, kissed him lightly on the cheek, and told him not to worry. But there had been something in her smile, something that faded too quickly, leaving him with the feeling that he wasn't seeing the whole picture. Now, Sitting in the dim light of his office, the truth was clear and terrifying. Emma had been unfaithful. Liam shot up from his chair and began pacing the room, his fists clenched. The calm, composed demeanor he had always prided himself on was falling apart. He had always thought of himself as someone who could stay level-headed, no matter the situation. But now, all he wanted to do was explode, smash something, confront Emma, demand the truth. His phone buzzed on the desk, snapping him out of his whirlwind of anger. It was a message from Emma. "Hey, are you working late again? Just checking in. Love you." Liam stared at the screen, a wave of disgust washing over him. Love you? How could she write those words so casually after spending the evening with someone else? He set the phone back down, his hands shaking, paralyzed by the weight of the truth he had uncovered. What now? Should he confront her? End it all? His future suddenly felt like an endless maze of uncertainty, but one thing was certain: he couldn't let this go. His mind drifted back to when they first fell in love. He remembered how much they had once cared for each other, the joy they shared, the dreams they had built together. Everything had seemed so right back then. But somewhere along the way, it had all started to crumble. Liam couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when things began to change, but he knew that a widening chasm had grown between them. To distract himself from that growing distance, he had thrown himself into his work, taking on more hours, convinced that if he worked hard enough, he could still secure the future they had once envisioned. But while he was focused on their dreams, it seemed Emma's attention had drifted elsewhere. With a deep sigh, Liam turned back to his laptop and opened the folder he had carefully compiled over the past few weeks. Inside was a collection of photos, messages and financial statements, evidence of the dinners and trips Emma had shared with Daniel, none of which included him. He had suspected something for a while, but now the reality stared back at him in undeniable clarity. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a full-blown affair. Daniel's name echoed in Liam's mind, a constant reminder of the betrayal he could no longer ignore. He pictured Daniel carefree, perhaps a younger version of himself unburdened by the weight of long-term commitment. Liam could almost hear Daniel's smug laughter, thinking he had outplayed him, believing he had the upper hand. "You really think you'll get away with this, don't you?" Liam whispered, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. His chest tightened, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he considered his next move. But it wasn't just Daniel who fueled his rage, it was Emma's betrayal that stung the deepest. The realization that she had led a double life without him catching on was the most painful blow. Liam had always prided himself on being perceptive, always a step ahead, both in business and in life. His entire career was built on anticipating the actions of others, yet somehow he had missed this. He scrolled to another picture: Emma and Daniel, smiling at each other across a restaurant table, her hand resting softly on his. The intimacy in the photo made Liam's stomach turn. Was this what their 37 years of marriage had come to? A sham. His eyes drifted toward the clock. It was nearly 3 a.m. Emma should be sound asleep by now, blissfully unaware that her web of lies was beginning to unravel. He quietly closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, letting the silence of the room envelop him. He wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. This wasn't just infidelity, it was war. And if there was one thing Liam knew how to do, it was win a war. He would wait, let Emma continue her game, and bide his time. When the right moment came, he would strike. For now, though, he was content to observe. He picked up his phone and read the last message Emma had sent him. With a steady hand, he typed back, "Love you too," and set the phone down, a barely noticeable smile creeping onto his lips. Later that evening, Emma returned home, the jingle of her keys breaking the stillness of the house. The dim light from the living room was the only illumination. She kicked off her shoes, expecting the usual quiet, but something felt off. There was a tension in the air, unspoken yet heavy. As she stepped into the room, she saw Liam sitting in the armchair, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. He wasn't watching TV or reading, just staring into his drink, as though the answers to his questions lay at the bottom of the glass. His expression was unreadable, but the coldness in his gaze sent a chill down her spine. "How was your day?" Liam asked, his voice calm but laced with an undertone of something darker. Emma froze for a split second before regaining her composure. Forcing a smile, she took a few steps forward, trying to keep her tone casual. "It was fine," she said lightly, Just a regular day. How about yours?" Liam didn't answer right away. He took a slow, deliberate sip of whiskey, his eyes never leaving hers. Finally, he set the glass down with a soft thud. "Interesting," he said quietly, each word measured. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About us. About the choices we've made." Emma's heart skipped a beat. There was something unsettling in his tone, a danger lurking beneath the surface. Her pulse quickened, but she refused to let him see her unease. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice coming out sharper than she had intended. Liam leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his gaze piercing. "Do you think you're clever?" Emma, his words were as sharp as a knife, slicing through the tension in the room. "Do you really believe you can keep playing this game without consequences?" Emma's chest tightened, panic starting to rise within her, but she kept her exterior calm, crossing her arms in a show of defiance. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, knowing full well what he was hinting at, but unwilling to admit it. Liam's eyes narrowed as he studied her, suspicion clear in his expression. Without warning, he stood, his movements deliberate, heavy. His footsteps echoed across the floor as he approached, stopping just a few steps away from her. He placed his empty glass on the mantel, the silence between them stretching to a nearly unbearable length. "I know everything, Emma. About Daniel, about your lies," he said, his quiet words hitting her like a blow. Emma's throat tightened, and for the first time she struggled to maintain her composure. "Liam," she began, but her voice wavered. He cut her off, his tone now cold as ice. "You told me to stay away from him, didn't you?" He stepped even closer, his presence overwhelming. "Well, guess what? I didn't listen." Emma's face went pale, her knees weak, but she forced herself to stand firm. "Liam, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling with fear, but it was clear he wasn't listening. Now standing inches from her, his eyes burned into hers, the tension between them thick and suffocating. "You thought I wouldn't figure it out. You really thought you could make a fool out of me?" His voice grew louder, trembling with the anger he could barely contain. "You made a mistake, Emma. And now you're going to pay for it." Emma's mind raced. She had always believed Liam was too distracted by his work to notice what was happening behind his back. She never imagined he would start digging into her secrets. But now, seeing the fury in his cold, focused eyes, she realized just how wrong she had been. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. She wasn't sure what she feared more, what he knew, or what he was about to reveal. Liam didn't answer right away. He turned, walking slowly toward the window to stare out at the quiet street. When he spoke again, his voice was disturbingly calm. "I want to meet him. Daniel, your little secret." Emma held her breath. "You," she started, but he cut her off again, his face remaining emotionless. "Oh yes," he said in a flat tone. "We had a talk. Let's just say he won't be around anymore." Her heart raced. She stepped forward, her voice shaky with desperation. "What did you do to him, Liam?" A cold, sinister smile crept across Liam's face. "I did what had to be done. He's no longer your problem, Emma." Terror gripped her. She took a step back, her voice barely a whisper. You couldn't have horrifying possibilities flooded her mind. Had Liam hurt him? Threatened him? Worse? Liam turned away, the smile fading as he poured himself another drink. He swirled the liquid slowly, his gaze distant. "It doesn't matter anymore," he said, his tone even and controlled. "There's only one thing that matters now." Emma stood frozen, her entire body tense, her heart pounding in her ears as she waited for his next words. Finally, Liam turned to her, his face calm but his words lethal. "The game is over, Emma. You made your choice. Now it's time to pay for it." Emma tried to speak, her lips parting as if to offer an explanation, an apology, or some excuse, but no words came. Liam's declaration hung in the air, heavy and final, like a sentence that couldn't be reversed. "Liam, please." It was a mistake, she thought, but the words stayed trapped inside. She couldn't bring herself to say them. Liam shook his head slowly, resolutely. "No more lies, Emma. I've had enough," he said, placing his glass back on the table with a sharp, final sound. "I'm done." The finality of his words hit her harder than she could have ever anticipated. As if the ground beneath her had given way, Emma stood frozen, realizing she had lost all control. For so long she had believed she could manage everything, confident that she could manipulate any situation to her advantage. But now, standing in front of Liam, his gaze cold and restrained, she understood just how far things had spiraled out of her grasp. "What are you going to do?" she whispered, barely able to speak. Without answering, Liam walked past her toward the stairs. Just before disappearing from sight, he glanced back over his shoulder, his face unreadable. "You'll find out soon," he said, leaving Emma in a silence that grew heavier with each passing second as her world began to crumble. Liam had always been a strategist. His success in business was built on careful planning, always knowing when to act and staying one step ahead of his competitors. To him, Daniel wasn't just another man who had slept with his wife. He was a problem to be solved, a weakness to exploit. Liam waited, biding his time, gathering all the information he needed. For weeks, Liam silently observed Daniel, studying his routines, his habits, and his vulnerabilities. Daniel was reckless, too sure of his charm and his ability to dodge consequences. He thought he could get away with everything, just like Emma. But Liam, always ahead of the game, saw through them both. One evening, Liam decided it was time to act. Emma had left earlier that night, heading off to yet another one of her secret meetings, lies she had long stopped bothering to make convincing. They were lazy now, as transparent as they were meaningless. Liam watched her leave, knowing exactly where she was going, but today he didn't care about Emma. Today his focus was on Daniel. As night settled, Liam left the house without a word. The drive to Daniel's apartment was quiet, the steady hum of the engine matching the rhythm of the plan Liam had replayed in his mind countless times. He parked a block away, walking the rest of the distance in silence, blending into the shadows like a hunter stalking his prey. Liam knew Daniel's routine. He knew he would be home soon. Positioning himself near the building's entrance, hidden behind a row of parked cars, Liam waited. His pulse remained steady, his thoughts razor-sharp. This wasn't about anger anymore, it was about precision. For revenge, after all, was best executed without emotion. The quiet night was interrupted by the low rumble of a car approaching. Liam tensed but stayed hidden as the vehicle parked nearby. The driver's door opened, and Daniel stepped out, his casual movements instantly aggravating Liam. Daniel had no clue what was coming. Liam's voice rang out, calm and chilling. "You must be Daniel." Daniel froze, his hand hovering near the lock. Slowly he turned toward the voice, confusion and irritation flickering across his face as he tried to make out the figure in the shadows. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his brow furrowing in frustration. Liam stepped forward, his gaze locked on Daniel. "I'm Emma's husband," he said, the simple words landing like a bomb. Daniel's face drained of color as the realization hit him. He stood there, mouth slightly open, unable to form words. The tension thickened in the air, choking off any explanation he might have offered. Instinctively, his hand reached for his phone, fumbling awkwardly in his pocket. Liam, calm and controlled, expected the move. Before Daniel could even react, Liam closed the distance in 2 swift strides. With a sharp motion, he knocked the phone from Daniel's hand, sending it clattering to the pavement, the sound of shattering glass piercing the night. "I think you're clever, don't you?" Liam muttered, his voice low but filled with unmistakable menace. "You got involved with my wife and thought I wouldn't find out." Daniel, his breath quickening, took a nervous step back. But Liam was already on him, moving with unsettling speed. In one fluid motion, Liam slammed Daniel against the nearest wall, gripping his collar with crushing force. Daniel gasped, struggling for breath, his wide eyes brimming with panic. "I didn't know," Daniel stammered, his voice shaky. "Don't lie," Liam growled, his grip tightening. He leaned in closer, his voice cold and deliberate. "I've seen the texts, the letters. Don't even try to deny it." Daniel's eyes darted wildly, searching for any possible escape, but there was none. What terrified him most wasn't Liam's fury, it was his precision. This was no blind rage, it was a carefully planned ambush, every second seemingly rehearsed. "Did you really think you could just walk away?" Liam whispered, his face inches from Daniel's. "No consequences? No price to pay?" Daniel squirmed under Liam's grip, his voice trembling as he began to beg. I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean for it to go this far. Liam's lips curled into a grim, joyless smile. Too late for that. With sudden, brutal force, Liam drove his fist into Daniel's stomach. The impact knocked the air from Daniel's lungs, and he doubled over, gasping. But Liam wasn't finished. He grabbed Daniel by the throat and slammed him against the wall again, harder this time. Daniel groaned weakly, raising his hands in a futile attempt to defend himself, but it was no use. Liam was in complete control, each move methodical and merciless. Another punch landed squarely on Daniel's face, sending him crumpling to the ground. You took everything from me, Liam snarled, standing over him. And you thought you could just walk away as if nothing happened. Daniel, now on all fours, coughed and wheezed, struggling to stay conscious. He tried to crawl away, but Liam wasn't done. Grabbing Daniel by the shirt, he yanked him up and threw him against the wall once more. Please, Daniel rasped, his voice barely audible. I didn't. You didn't think Liam cut him off, his tone icy and devoid of emotion. You didn't think I'd find out. You didn't think there'd be consequences. Well, here they are. Beaten and broken, Daniel slumped against the wall, barely able to hold himself upright. His eyes, filled with fear and desperation, stared at Liam. Liam crouched beside him, his voice low but chilling. Tonight you leave town. If I ever see you again, he left the threat hanging, unfinished. Daniel understood perfectly. He nodded weakly, his breath shallow, his body trembling. Rising to his feet, Liam casually brushed off his hands, as though the entire confrontation had been a minor inconvenience. He cast one final glance at Daniel, his expression unreadable. That was your warning, he said quietly. Next time you won't be so lucky. Without another word, Liam turned and walked away, leaving Daniel crumpled in the shadows, broken and defeated. It was well past midnight when Emma's phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. Still groggy, she stirred and instinctively reached for it, assuming it was Daniel confirming he had made it home safely. Without even checking the caller ID, she mumbled a drowsy hello into the phone. A brief silence followed before a measured, serious voice spoke. Mrs. Smith. Emma's eyes flew open, her body instantly alert at the alarming tone. Sleep was now a distant memory as tension gripped her. Yes, this is Emma, she replied, her voice sharp with sudden anxiety. The voice continued, calm but filled with urgency. I'm calling from the hospital. You need to come to the emergency room immediately. There's been an incident. Emma's heart clenched, her pulse drowning out everything else. Is it Liam, she asked, trying to control the panic in her voice. A flicker of hope surfaced. Maybe it was Liam, maybe something had happened to him, a way out of their tense marriage. The pause on the other end felt like an eternity before the voice responded. No, it's Daniel. He's been seriously injured. You need to come right away. The words hit her like a punch. Daniel, she whispered, barely audible. Her throat tightened, and a wave of fear washed over her. What happened, she managed to ask, her voice trembling. The person on the line remained composed, but the gravity of the situation was clear in their tone. His injuries are severe, Mrs. Smith. The doctors are doing everything they can. Please come as soon as possible. Emma's mind spiraled into chaos. What had happened? Could Liam have been involved? The thought was too horrifying to linger on for long. Without wasting another moment, she threw off the blankets and scrambled to get dressed, her hands trembling as she struggled with the buttons on her shirt. The drive to the hospital blurred past. She barely remembered getting behind the wheel or speeding through the deserted streets, her mind focused solely on Daniel. Images of him flashed before her the way he had reignited a passion she thought was long dead. And now he was fighting for his life. By the time she screeched to a halt in the hospital parking lot, her thoughts were racing with fear and uncertainty. Rushing through the sliding doors, Emma's breath came in shallow gasps as she approached the reception desk. I'm here for Daniel, she mumbled, momentarily forgetting his last name in her panic. The nurse behind the desk nodded with understanding, her expression grave. Room 210, third floor. The doctors are still with him, but you can go in. Without hesitation, Emma hurried to the elevator, her heart pounding in her chest as the cold hospital air chilled her. Reaching Daniel's room, she hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the door handle. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The sight before her was worse than she could have imagined. Daniel lay motionless on the hospital bed, his face swollen and bruised, wrapped in bandages. Machines beeped rhythmically, and tubes surrounded him, creating an atmosphere that was as grim as it was clinical. His eyes were swollen shut, and his head was covered in a blood-stained bandage. The strong, vibrant man she had known was now a broken shell. Nausea rose in Emma's throat, her knees weak, as she staggered toward the chair beside his bed. She collapsed into it, staring at his battered body, her mind struggling to comprehend what had happened. "Oh God," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "What did they do to you?" But Daniel didn't respond. He was unreachable, either lost in pain or numbed by the medications dulling his mind. Emma's vision blurred with unshed tears as she reached out to take his hand, the coldness of his skin sending a shiver down her spine. The door creaked open, and a doctor entered, glancing at her briefly before focusing on the chart at the foot of the bed. His face was lined with exhaustion. "Mrs. Smith," he asked softly. Emma barely managed to nod, her throat too tight to speak. With a heavy sigh, the doctor closed the chart and looked at her, a mix of sympathy and professionalism in his expression. "He's stable for now, but his injuries are severe. We're doing everything we can, but recovery will be long if he even survives." The doctor's words spun Emma's world into chaos. She had expected conflict, maybe even violence from Liam, but nothing like this. This was beyond anything she could have imagined. "Who did this?" she whispered, though deep down she already knew. The doctor met her gaze with a grim expression. "The police are investigating. As far as we know, he was attacked. We hope that when he wakes up, he'll be able to tell us more, if he's able to speak." Emma sat in silence, her eyes fixed on Daniel's fragile form as guilt and fear battled within her. The minutes passed in a blur, unnoticed. Eventually, with trembling legs, she stood and left the hospital. The night air stung her skin as she got into her car, but she was too numb to feel it. Her mind raced, trying to piece together how things had gone so far. Liam had found Daniel, but how? And what had he done to him? When Emma returned home, she was greeted by an oppressive silence. She tossed her keys onto the kitchen counter and wandered aimlessly through the house, her thoughts swirling. That's when she noticed a single sheet of paper lying conspicuously on the table. Her heart sank as she approached it, her hands shaking as she picked it up. The note was short, scrawled in Liam's familiar handwriting. "Cheetah. This is only the beginning." Emma's legs gave out, and she collapsed into a chair, the paper trembling in her grasp. Liam was gone. His half of the closet was empty. His shoes, once neatly lined up, were missing. His clothes had vanished from the drawers, and the familiar scent of his cologne no longer lingered in the air. Their joint bank accounts had been drained, her expensive jewelry gone, and every trace of Liam had been meticulously erased. All that remained was the venomous message, its hateful words echoing in her mind every time she closed her eyes. She sat there at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the now useless checkbook. She had called the bank, tried to track the withdrawals, but Liam had covered his tracks too well. He wasn't coming back. The money was gone, the savings depleted, and there was nothing left to salvage. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and desolate, mirroring the isolation and ruin that had become Emma's life. The days blurred together as Emma struggled to cope with the wreckage of her life. She rarely left the house, ignoring the concerned calls from friends and family. Patricia had come by several times, worried about her, but Emma couldn't bring herself to face her. It felt as though everything she had worked for, everything she had been, had crumbled to dust. On the rare occasion she ventured out, it was only to visit Daniel in the hospital, though that had become unbearably painful. While his condition had stabilized, the damage was irreversible. The man who once brought passion and excitement into her life now lay broken, both physically and emotionally. One afternoon, Emma stood outside his hospital room, hesitating. She hadn't seen him since the night Liam had attacked him. The nurse's words echoed in her mind, "He's recovering, but slowly." His injuries were severe, and the road ahead is uncertain. Gathering her courage, Emma knocked softly on the door, unsure if Daniel would even want to see her. Daniel's eyes, once warm, now looked cold and distant as they met hers. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice hoarse and a shadow of what it had once been. Emma took a cautious step forward, unsure of how to bridge the enormous gap between them. "Daniel, I never wanted things to end up like this. I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice fragile. He let out a bitter, pained laugh that twisted into a grimace. "Didn't want this? What did you think would happen, Emma? How did you expect it to end? You played with fire, and now we're both burning." His words sliced through her, and though her eyes filled with tears, she fought to hold them back. "I didn't know Liam would go this far. I never could have predicted." "Enough," Daniel interrupted, his tone ice-cold and void of any forgiveness. "I don't want to hear your excuses or your pathetic sympathy." His voice grew sharper with each breath, the anger in his words cutting deep. "Because of you, I've lost everything: my career, my reputation, my future. Do you really think your apology can fix any of this?" Each word landed like a blow, heavy with betrayal and fury. Emma felt the force of his contempt and stepped back, overwhelmed. "Daniel, please," she began, but he cut her off once more, his voice final and unyielding. "Leave." His gaze locked on hers, leaving no room for argument. His words carried an inevitability that crushed her. Frozen for a moment, Emma realized there was nothing left to say. She turned and left, the soft click of the door behind her echoing like thunder in her chest. It was over. Daniel was gone, just like Liam, and now she was utterly, irreversibly alone. Meanwhile, in a distant city far removed from Emma's crumbled world, Liam was embracing his new life. He had taken everything from her: her savings, her jewelry, and even her last shred of dignity, and used it to reinvent himself. The man once trapped in a stagnant marriage had discarded his old life, using her stolen assets to start anew. The quiet husband who had once stayed late at work, blind to the world around him, had vanished. Now, Liam was free. He settled into a modest apartment, not lavish but enough to begin his new life without drawing attention. Liam wasn't interested in flaunting his newfound wealth. What mattered most to him was the satisfaction of having walked away unscathed. He kept a low profile, blending seamlessly into his new surroundings. Finding a job had been easy, not glamorous, but it paid the bills and kept him under the radar. Occasionally, when the mood struck, Liam would send Emma cruel reminders of his existence. A postcard from a random town or a cryptic message from an untraceable phone. The first postcard arrived 10 days after his disappearance. It was simple: no return address, just 3 words in his familiar handwriting: "Miss me yet?" When Emma saw the card for the first time, rage welled up inside her, and she nearly tore it to pieces. But she knew there was nothing she could do. Liam was out there somewhere, living freely, while she remained behind, buried under the consequences of her choices. The postcards continued to arrive sporadically, each one more mocking than the last. Some were blank, bearing only faint traces of ink, while others contained chilling messages like "How's Daniel?" or "Still thinking of me." Every postcard was a fresh wound, a reminder that he was watching, and she was powerless to stop him. The days melted into weeks and weeks into months, as Emma's life spiraled into a cycle of isolation and regret. She attempted to return to work, but the whispers and stares followed her everywhere. People knew they knew about the affair, Daniel's downfall, and Liam's mysterious disappearance, which left chaos in its wake. She felt the weight of their judgment in every passing glance and every hushed conversation that fell silent the moment she entered a room. There was no escape from the fallout of her decisions. Friends gradually drifted away, family conversations grew colder, and Daniel. He had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her anymore. Her world had disintegrated, and there was nothing left to rebuild it. Despite her guilt, her loneliness, and the relentless postcards Liam left behind, a small part of her clung to the faint hope that maybe somehow he would return. But deep down, Emma knew it was just a fantasy. He was gone for good. That painful truth hit her hard one grey day when a knock on the door shattered the heavy silence of her home. She wasn't expecting anyone. Most of her friends had drifted away, and she had distanced herself from the few who remained. When she opened the door, a man in a sharp suit stood there, holding a thick folder. "Emma Smith?" he asked curtly. She nodded cautiously. "Yes, that's me." Without another word, he handed her an envelope and left. Confused, Emma closed the door and tore open the envelope with trembling hands. Her eyes landed on the bold heading divorce petition. A heavy sense of despair settled over her. She had known this day would come. Liam had left months ago, leaving her life in tatters, but seeing it in writing made the finality unbearable. She sank into a chair, staring blankly at the legal documents. There was no money to contest the divorce, no means to hire a lawyer, but even if she could, what would be the point? There was nothing left to fight for. The house was being sold to cover her mounting debts, her savings were depleted, and she was drowning in bills. Emma had been ignoring the rising tide of expenses, clinging to the tiny hope that something, anything, might change. But nothing had. And now Liam was cutting the last fragile thread that still connected them. The days blurred together as Emma moved aimlessly through the ruins of her life. She went through her daily motions, making coffee, cleaning, scrolling through job listings, but it all felt hollow. She was empty, drifting through life with no sense of direction. The romance that had once brought her happiness now seemed like a cruel joke. Daniel was gone, Liam was gone, and she was left to face the aftermath alone. One evening, as she sat in the kitchen staring blankly at the divorce papers, her phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. The number was unfamiliar, but an odd impulse made her pick up. "Hello," she answered, her voice flat. Emma, the voice on the other end, was unmistakable. Her grip on the phone tightened. "Liam," she said, her heart racing. "What do you want?" A hint of irritation crept into her voice. There was a long pause before he finally replied. "Just wanted to make sure you got the papers." Emma swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "I got them," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is this really what you want?" Her words trembled, laced with desperation. A soft laugh came through the line, cold and sharp, sending a chill through her. "It's already done, Emma. You should be glad I even care enough to check. After everything you did, you're lucky I'm not leaving you with less." His words landed like a punch, but she knew better than to argue. He had already taken everything: her money, her home, her pride. All that was left was the weight of guilt and regret. "Why?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Why are you doing this? You've already destroyed everything." Another pause. When Liam spoke again, his tone was calm, detached. "Because I want you to remember. I want you to wake up every day knowing this is your fault. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to let him hear her break. "You didn't have to ruin everything," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Liam laughed again, colder this time. "You ruined yourself the moment you thought you could lie to me. The divorce. That's just the final touch. Now you're free. Isn't that what you wanted?" His words cut deep. And though she didn't respond, she couldn't deny the truth hidden in them. In some twisted way she had wanted this: an escape, a spark, something to shatter the monotony that had crept into their lives. But now the reality of her decisions weighed down on her, suffocating. She had thrown away everything, and in the end she was left with nothing. "Goodbye," Emma, Liam said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Enjoy your freedom," and with that, the call ended. The months that followed dragged on, empty and endless. The divorce went through without a fight. Emma signed the papers, watching as the last pieces of her marriage disintegrated. She was officially free, but that freedom felt hollow, meaningless. Liam's presence still loomed over her like a dark shadow, clouding her thoughts. As for Daniel, he had vanished without a trace. He had been discharged from the hospital, but he had disappeared from her life completely. Their affair, once a secret passion, was now public knowledge, and with it came the destruction of any hope she had of salvaging what was left. Daniel's world had crumbled just as hers had, and it was clear he had no intention of rebuilding it alongside her. Meanwhile, Liam had moved on, rebuilding his life far away from the wreckage he had left behind. He rarely thought of Emma, except for the occasional postcard or message, a small, cruel reminder that he hadn't forgotten her. His revenge wasn't just about draining her finances, ruining her reputation, or ending their marriage. The real punishment was knowing that Emma would never escape the consequences of her own choices. Her past would follow her, a shadow she could never shake. Every time she looked in the mirror, she would see a woman who had sacrificed everything for a fleeting moment of desire, a woman now marked by regret and endless sorrow. Liam was free. His revenge was complete. And Emma? She would never truly be free of him. This is the end of the story, my friend. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. May the Force be with you.